Iranian Kurdistan or Eastern Kurdistan is an unofficial name for the parts of northwestern Iran inhabited by Kurds which borders Iraq and Turkey. It includes Kurdistan Province, Kermanshah Province, Hamadan Province, most of Ilam Province, and some parts of West Azerbaijan and North Khorasan provinces. Kurds generally consider northwestern Iran to be one of the four parts of a Greater Kurdistan, which also includes parts of southeastern Turkey, northern Syria, and northern Iraq. According to the last census conducted in 2006, the four Kurdish-inhabited provinces in Iran, West Azerbaijan, Kermanshah Province, Kurdistan Province, and Ilam Province have a total population of 6,738,787. Pockets of Lurs inhabit the southern areas of Ilam Province. For the 4 to 5 million Iranian Kurds, a majority are Sunni Muslims. Sunni Muslim Kurds inhabit Kurdistan Province and some parts of Kermanshah and West Azerbaijani Province. Shia Kurds inhabit Kermanshah Province, except for those parts where people are Jah, and Ilam Province, as well as some parts of Kurdistan and Hamadan provinces. The Kurds of Khorasan Province in northeastern Iran are also adherents of Shia Islam. During the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the major Kurdish political parties were unsuccessful in absorbing Shia Kurds, who at that period had no interest in autonomy. History. For the origin of the Kurds, see History of the Kurdish people and Kurdish people. A very early record of confrontation between the Kurds and the Sassanid Empire appears in a historical text called the Book of the Deeds of Ardashir, son of Babik. The book explains the life of Ardashir Papagan, or Ardashir I of Persia, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, and is written in the Pahlavi language. In this book, the author explains the battle between Kurdish King Madag and Ardashir, one of the most significant kingdoms within Ardashir I's dynasty was known as the House of Chaos, which remained a semi-independent Kurdish kingdom until A.D. 380, when Ardashir II removed the dynasty's last ruling member. Medieval Kurdish dynasties from the 10th century to 12th century A.D. Two Kurdish dynasties were ruling this region, the Hassanwahids and the Ayarids. The Ardalan state, established in the early 14th century, controlled the territories of Zadiawa, Karnakin, Kirkuk, Kifri, and Khorasan. The capital city of the state was first in Sharazor in present-day Iraqi Kurdistan, but was moved to Sindh later on. The Ardalan dynasty continued to rule the region until the Qayyar-Moinic Nasir al-Din Shah ended the rule in 1867. Seljuk and Khwarezmid period. In the 12th century CE, Sultan Sanjar created a province called Kurdistan, centered at Bathar, located to the northeast of Hamadan. This province included Hamadan, Dinawar, Kermanshah, Sanamdaj and Sharazur. It was ruled by Sulayman, the nephew of Sanjar. In 1217, Kurds of Zagros defeated the troops of Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, the Khwarezmid king, who were sent from Hamadan. Safavid period. According to the Encyclopedia of Islam, the Safavid family came from Iranian Kurdistan, and later moved to Azerbaijan. They finally settled in the 11th century CE at Ardabil. During Safavid rule, the government tried to extend its control over Kurdish-inhabited areas in western Iran. At the time, there were a number of semi-independent Kurdish emirates such as the Makrian, Ardalan, and Shikik tribes around Lake Urmia and northwest Iran. Kurds resisted this policy and tried to keep some form of self-rule. This led to a series of bloody confrontations between the Safavids and the Kurds. The Kurds were finally defeated, and as a result the Safavids decided to punish rebellious Kurds by forced relocation and deportation in the 15th–16th century. This policy began under the reign of the Safavid king Tahmasp I. Between 1534 and 1535, Tahmasp I began the systematic destruction of the old Kurdish cities and the countryside. Large numbers of Kurds from these areas found themselves deported to the Alborz Mountains and Khorasan, as well as the heights in the central Iranian plateau. At this time, the last remnant of the ancient royal Hadabani tribe of central Kurdistan was removed from the heartland of Kurdistan and deported to Khorasan, where they are still found today. The political play of forced mass relocations performed by the Safavids, some of which were directly as a precautionary defense against the neighboring Ottoman danger, included more relocations under notably Abbas I, which is Irus, or the mass relocations and deportations of the Kurds once again within his large realm, as well as other substantial minorities such as the Georgians, Armenians, and Circassians. Battle of Dimdim. There is a well-documented historical account of a long battle in 1609–1610 between Kurds and the Safavid Empire. The battle took place around a fortress called Dimdim, located in Beradust region around Lake Urmia in northwestern Iran. In 1609, the ruined structure was rebuilt by Emir Zanlep Ziran, ruler of Beradust, who sought to maintain the independence of his expanding principality in the face of both Ottoman and Safavid penetration into the region. Rebuilding Dimdim was considered a move toward independence that could threaten Safavid power in the northwest. Many Kurds, including the rulers of Mukrian, rallied around Emir Khan. After a long and bloody siege led by the Safavid Grand Vizier Haytham Beg, which lasted from November 1609 to the summer of 1610, Dimdim was captured. All the defenders were massacred. Shah Abbas ordered a general massacre in Beradust and Mukrian and resettled the Turkish Afshar tribe in the region while deporting many Kurdish tribes to Khorasan. Alike politically motivated deportations were performed against other substantial minorities of the Safavid realm as well, such as the Georgians, Armenians, and Circassians. Although Persian historians depicted the First Battle of Dimdim as a result of Kurdish mutiny or treason in Kurdish oral traditions, literary works, and histories, it was treated as a struggle of the Kurdish people against foreign domination. In fact, Beit-i Dimdim is considered a national epic second only to Mem-Musin by Ahmad Khani. The first literary account of Dimdim battle was written by Fakir-Tehran. The Khorasani Kurds are a community of nearly 1.7 million people deported from western Kurdistan to North Khorasan by Persia during the 16th to 18th centuries. Afshar periods. Kurds took advantage of the Afghan invasion of the Safavid realm in the early 18th century, and conquered Hamadan and penetrated to the area near Isfahan. Nader Shah sought to suppress a Kurdish rebellion in 1747, but he was assassinated before completing the expedition. After Nadir's death, Kurdish tribes exploited the power vacuum and captured parts of Fars. Qajar period. In 1880, Sheikh Ubaydullah, a Kurdish leader, engaged in a series of revolts against the Iranian government. These revolts were successfully suppressed by the Qajar kings, and this was one of Iran's few victories during the Qajar period. In the early 20th century, Ismail Agha Simcoe took advantage of the chaotic situation in the aftermath of World War I and rebelled against the Iranian government. He was finally defeated by Reza Shah Pahlavi. Kurds in modern Iran. Simcoe revolts against Reza Shah. The weakness of the Persian government during World War I encouraged some Kurdish chiefs to take advantage of the chaotic situation. Simcoe, chief of the Shikik tribe, established his authority in the area west of Lake Urmia from 1918 to 1922. Jafar Sultan of Huraman region took control of the region between Marivan and north of Halabia and remained independent until 1925. In 1922, Reza Khan took action against Kurdish leaders. Simcoe was forced to abandon his region in the fall of 1922, and spent 8 years in hiding. When the Iranian government persuaded him to submit, he was ambushed and killed around Ushno in 1930. After this, Reza Shah pursued a crude but effective policy against the Kurds. Hundreds of Kurdish chiefs were deported and forced into exile. The lands were also confiscated by the government. World War II. When Allied troops entered Iran in September 1941, the Persian army was quickly dissolved and their ammunition was seized by the Kurds. Sons of the Kurdish chief seized the opportunity and escaped from their exile in Tehran. Amir Rashid, a Kurdish chief from Bana, took control of Sardasht, Bana and Marwan in western Iran. He was finally driven out of the region by the Persian army in the fall of 1944. Republic of Kurdistan in Mahabad. Although Iran had declared its neutrality in the Second World War, it was occupied by Allied forces. With support from the Soviet Union, a Kurdish state was created in the city of Mahabad in 1946 by the Kurdish movement Kermanshah under the leadership of Qazi Muhammad. Since the minuscule entity extended no further than the small cities of Mahabad, Buchan, Paranshah, and Oshnavia in Iran, not even all of Iranian Kurdistan supported the experiment, let alone the Kurds in other states. The Republic of Mahabad, as it is often called, lasted less than a year, as the end of the war and the withdrawal of the occupying Soviet forces allowed the central government to defeat the separatists and return Kurdistan to Iran. The Islamic Revolution and the Kurdish political organizations were enthusiastic supporters of the revolution against the Shah, which brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power in February 1979. The Shah had shown himself to be no friend of Kurdish aspirations for greater autonomy, and a loosening of Tehran's control over their affairs. For the early days of the revolution, relations between the central government and Kurdish organizations have been fraught with difficulties. The Kurds, with their different language and traditions and their cross-border alliances, were seen as vulnerable to exploitation by foreign powers who wished to destabilize the young republic. Sunni Kurds, unlike the overwhelming majority of the countrymen, abstained from voting to endorse the creation of an Islamic republic in April 1979. That referendum institutionalized Shia primacy and made no provision for regional autonomy. The crisis deepened after Kurds were denied seats in the Assembly of Experts gathering in 1979, which were responsible for writing the new constitution. Ayatollah Khomeini prevented Dry Ghasemlu, the elected representative of the region, to participate in the Assembly of Experts' first meeting. Kurds were therefore deprived of the political rights under the new Iranian constitution, since the majority of them belonged to the Sunni branch of Islam. The wave of nationalism engulfed Eastern Kurdistan after the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty, in line with a series of anti-revolutionary revolts across the country. In early 1979, armed conflict broke out between armed Kurdish factions and the Iranian Revolutionary Government's security forces. The Kurdish forces included primarily the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan and the leftist Kemallah. The new leadership had little patience for Kurdish demands and opted for crushing unrest through military means. As a result, Ayatollah Khomeini, the new religious leader of Iran, declared a jihad against separatism in Iranian Kurdistan, declared in his statement on August 17, 1979. In a speech in December 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini called the concept of ethnic minorities contrary to Islamic doctrines. He also accused those who do not wish Muslim countries to be united in creating the issue of nationalism among minorities. His views were shared by many in the clerical leadership. In the spring of 1980, government forces under the command of President Abul Hassan Banisadr took back most of the Kurdish cities through a huge military campaign, sending in mechanized military divisions to Kurdish cities including Mahabad, Sanamdashpur, and Marivan. Entire villages and towns were destroyed to force Kurds into submission. Ayatollah Kakali sentenced thousands of men to execution after summary trials. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps fought to re-establish government control in the Kurdish regions. More than 10,000 Kurds were killed during this process. Kurdish movement between Shia Kurds in south of Iranian Kurdistan. David McDowell has argued that since the 1990s Kurdish nationalism has seeped into the Shia Kurdish area partly due to outrage against governments, violent suppression of Kurds farther north. But David Romano rejects such claims, noting that there's no evidence of an active guerrilla insurgency in the area. Although there is a new rise of Kurdish identity movement in the southern parts of Iranian Kurdistan, which has risen up from the first decade of 21st century, that shows itself in the way of formation of an armed group called the Partisans of Southern Kurdistan and some other organizations specially about Yazani people of the parts of Kurdistan. On December 2, 1996, the death of a prominent Sunni clergyman, Mullah Muhammad Rabbani, in Kermanshah led to violent clashes between Sunni Kurds and the security forces. Mullah Rabbani was the prayer leader in the Al-Shafi Mosque in Kermanshah. The protests continued for 3 days and spread to neighboring towns in the region. 1996 demonstrations. On December 2, 1996, the death of a prominent Sunni clergyman, Mullah Muhammad Rabbani, in Kermanshah led to violent clashes between Sunni Kurds and the security forces. Mullah Rabbani was the prayer leader in the Al-Shafi Mosque in Kermanshah. The protests continued for 3 days and spread to neighboring towns in the region. Khatami period. In 1997, Sunni Kurds, like many other Iranians, took part in the presidential election. Both civilian and military Kurdish opposition groups requested Kurds not to be indifferent toward the election. President Khatami praised the glory of Kurdish culture and history. For the Kurdish side, the demands were mainly related to the Kurdish language and top-level officials. In his first term, Khatami appointed Abdullah Ramazanzadeh to be the first Kurdish governor of the Iranian province of Kurdistan. He also appointed several Sunni and Shia Kurds as his own cabinet members advisors. In his second term, Khatami had 2 Kurdish cabinet members. Both of them were Shia. The increased presence of Kurdish representatives in the 6th Parliament led to expectations that some of the voters' demands would be met. After the first round, in which 18 Kurds were elected, one candidate said that he expected there would be more Kurdish instruction at the university in Sanamdaj, and he called on the Khatami government to have more Kurdish officials. Subsequently, a 40-member parliamentary faction representing the predominantly Kurdish provinces of Kurdistan and Kermanshah was formed. However, there were many other civilian Kurdish activists who did not join the reform movement. Muhammad Sadiq Kabadvan was among the latter, who started an independent human rights association to defend the rights of the Kurdish people. 1999 demonstrations. In February 1999, Kurdish nationalists took to the streets in several cities such as Mahabad, Sanamdaj and Urmia and staged mass protests against the government and in support of Abdullah Öcalan. This was viewed as transnationalization of the Kurdish movement. These protests were violently suppressed by the government forces. According to human rights groups, at least 20 people were killed. Discrimination against Sunni Muslims. In present-day Iran, while Shia religious institutions are encouraged, Sunni institutions are blocked. In 1993, a newly constructed Sunni mosque in Sanamdaj was destroyed by Shia Muslims. More than 1 million Sunnis live in Tehran and many of them are Kurds. In a rare public protest, 18 Sunni parliamentarians wrote to the authorities in July 2003 to criticize the treatment of the Sunni Muslim community and the refusal to allow construction of a mosque in Tehran that would serve the community. The Shivan Canary incident. On July 9, 2005, a Kurdish opposition activist, Shivan Canary, and 2 other Kurdish men were shot by Iranian security forces in Mahabad. According to witnesses, the security forces then tied Qadri's body to a Toyota Jeep and dragged it through the streets. Iranian authorities confirmed that Qadri, who was on the run and wanted by the judiciary, was shot and killed while allegedly evading arrest. For the next 6 weeks, riots and protests erupted in Kurdish towns and villages throughout Eastern Kurdistan such as Mahabad, Kermanshah, Sin, Sardasht, Oshnavia, Bana, Bokan and Sakis, with scores killed and injured, and an untold number arrested without charge. The Iranian authorities also shut down several major Kurdish newspapers, arresting reporters and editors. On the 13th of March 2006, Saleh Nikbakht, a well-known Iranian human rights lawyer who is Mr. Qadri's lawyer, announced that Qadri's murderer was a member of the police who shot the victim illegally. He also added that the murderer and the one who ordered the act are under investigation and the judiciary system has been cooperative up to now. Previously, government authorities accused Qadri of moral and financial violations. Saleh Nikbakht rejected all these allegations. Political prisoners and executions. Kurds have suffered a long history of discrimination in Iran. In a report released in 2008, Amnesty International said that Kurds have been a particular target of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the Kurds' social, political and cultural rights have been repressed, as have their economic aspirations. As a result, many human rights activists in Iran often shift the focus to specifically identify the Iranian authorities' violations of human rights against the Kurdish minority. However, according to Amnesty International, those activists who do link the human rights work, drawing attention to the government's failure to observe international human rights standards, to the Kurdish identity, they risk further violations of the rights. At the beginning of the 21st century, a number of Kurdish activists, writers, and teachers have been arrested for the work and were sentenced to death. The increase is likely due to the government's crackdown following the nationwide protests after Iran's presidential elections. Even before the elections, Kurdish rebel groups, specifically the Kurdistan Free Life Party (PJAK), have taken up arms against the state. In November 2009, Iran executed Ehsan Fatahian, the first of over a dozen political prisoners on death row, despite despite an international campaign calling for his release. Authorities accused Fatahian of carrying arms for an illegal organization and sentenced him to several years in prison. Fatahian never confessed to carrying arms and was not given a fair trial, nor was he permitted access to his lawyer, and the Kamala, the illegal organization he was accused of associating with, claimed that he had left the group a long time ago. Fatahian attempted to appeal, and when he did so, he was sentenced to death for enmity against God. His execution was condemned by human rights groups and activists internationally. In January 2010, Iran executed a second Kurdish political prisoner, Farsi Yasamani, for enmity against God. Like Fatahian, Yasamani was tortured and authorities tried to force him to confess, but he refused. He was also denied a fair trial, without notifying the families or lawyers of the political prisoners. Iranian authorities ordered the execution of 4 more Kurdish political prisoners, Ali Haydarian, Fahad Vakili, Mehdi Eslamian, Shiran Alamhouli, and Farzad Kamanga, a teacher who received a lot of attention internationally following his arrest in Iran on May 9, 2010. The 4 political prisoners suffered severe torture at the hands of Iranian authorities and were also forced to confess their memberships in an illegal organization, namely the Kurdistan Free Life Party. None of the activists were given fair trials, nor did they have access to the lawyers. Amnesty International Australia described the executions as a blatant attempt to intimidate members of the Kurdish minority. All activists denied any links to PJAK, and the leader of PJAK also denied any links to the 4 activists. Despite repeated international calls demanding the release or retrial of these 4 political prisoners, all were executed without any prior notice or warning. Following the executions, Iranian authorities refused to return the bodies of those executed to the families. As of May 2010, there were at least 16 other Kurdish political prisoners on death row. Not one case has been reported as having received a fair trial.